Hey guys, I just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce the next reading to you, which is The Refusal by Franz Kafka. It helps a little bit to understand who Franz Kafka is in order to understand his story. Admittedly, this is a pretty confusing story. It's intentionally a confusing story. It ties into what we're trying to learn about it. So be prepared that you're probably going to feel a little lost in this story. So let me tell you first about Franz Kafka, and then I'll tell you about this story in particular. So Franz Kafka was an Eastern European writer. He lived during World War One. He wrote most of his stuff during World War One. The story that you're reading was written in 1920. The interesting thing about Franz Kafka is that he's considered to be the father of what we call absurdism in writing. And if you're familiar with the word absurd, it means like strange or weird, unusual. And so most of his writings are very weird. They're very unusual. They kind of feel like a bad dream in a way. So, for example, his most famous story, called The Metamorphosis, is about a guy who one day wakes up as a giant cockroach and he tries to go about his normal life. He goes to work, he tries to take care of his family, but he's a bug. Now, to understand his stories, it helps to understand a little bit about him. He was somebody who he had a very low opinion of himself. He was probably, if he was alive today, we would consider him to be depressed. He definitely didn't think that he was worth much. And he had a terrible relationship with his father. His father was like this successful businessman, and he wanted Franz to be also a successful businessman, but that just wasn't him. And so he always felt this like pressure from his father to be more than he was. And he also hated his job. He worked in this big law firm and he was just like a paper pusher. He was a file clerk, and he just felt like he had no power to do anything. He felt like he was just a cog in a giant machine, and he always just felt these external pressures on him. And he always felt like he wasn't up to the task and that he had like no say in his own life. One of the things that is a consistent theme throughout his writing is feeling like you are trapped in what we call a bureaucracy. A bureaucracy just means like multiple levels of management and government and all of these power structures that have power over people's lives. And he kind of felt like he was just trapped in a maze with those things. Another one of his stories that is a good example is called The Trial, and it's about a guy who gets arrested and he never knows why he was arrested, and he ends up going to trial, and even during the trial he still doesn't know why he was actually arrested, what the charges were, and he ends up even getting convicted at the end of this trial, never knowing what he actually did. And so those two examples between the metamorphosis and between the trial kind of show you how Franz Kafka felt about the world and about himself. Okay, so the refusal. The refusal, not a terribly long story. It's like 2.5 pages long. This story takes place in a small town that's like out in the middle of nowhere. So imagine like out in like western Box Elder County, like towards the Nevada border, like one of those really small towns that has like maybe 100 people tops in it, and like maybe a tiny little school or something like that. But imagine that kind of really small town. Except this town is ruled over by a giant foreign empire. So again, imagine a small town out in western Box Elder County with 100 people that's ruled over by like Russia. So these people are not connected directly to the empire that rules over them. They feel very isolated from it. They feel very like detached from the government that has power over them, but they're also very scared of that government. They're kind of frozen in time. They don't seem to have a lot of momentum. They don't seem to have a lot of progress. They're just like too afraid to do anything because they're so afraid of this large foreign empire that rules over them. And they really never see anybody from that foreign empire except maybe some soldiers that come into town once in a while. Other than that, like they don't travel there. They don't really get any news from there. They don't even speak the same language as the empire that rules over them. But again, they're terrified of it. So What we're looking for in this story, and the whole point of this story, is we're looking for areas where the author is like intentionally seems to be leaving out details and is like ambiguous about things or mysterious about things. And then we're asking the question, why? What inferences can we make about those moments? So let me just leave you with a couple of moments that you can think about and you can certainly use for this unit. This story ends abruptly. When you get to the end, you're going to wonder, okay, is there more? Is this only part of the story? No, you have the full story. The question is where he chose to end it. What inferences can you make about where he ended it and why he ended it that way? Another thing that you can consider is that the whole reason this is called the refusal is because once a year, these villagers in this small town get to petition or ask a government representative. He's called the chief tax collector, the colonel. He's kind of like the ruler over the town. And they get to ask him for something for the town, something that would benefit the town. And every year, without fail, their petitions to him get refused. Now, you would think that they would react with sadness, but they don't. And that's kind of the plot twist of the story. Instead, they're like relieved when he declines their petitions. And so Franz Kafka doesn't tell us why they're relieved. So, what inferences can you make based on the rest of the story and the setting and the situation? Why do you think that the townspeople would be actually relieved that they never get any of their petitions granted by the town's leader, the tax collector, or the colonel, as they call him? Another instance in this is when they describe the soldiers that come into town. The description is really vague. They kind of compare them to animals. And when the soldiers come into the town and like go into like local shops and stuff like that, the townspeople just like suddenly stop talking and then they just slowly leave. And like, the story just gets emptied out. Again, Franz Kafka doesn't give us any details as to why this happens. And so we can make an inference. What do you think, based on the context of the story, what do you think is going on that would make the townspeople become silent and leave? So there's three examples for you that you could use to develop the lessons that you have in this of looking for when authors don't give information, when they don't give a lot of detail, when they seem to be kind of ambiguous is the word about things. What inferences can we make? I hope that helps you out with this. And sorry for the long video. Let me know if you have any questions.